Welcome to the Working Genius podcast, where we discuss anything and everything related to the 6 types of working genius and how it impacts your work and your life. I'm Pat Lencioni, your host, joined by Cody, Bo, Tracy, Matt's in studio, Karen's in Norway. How is everybody doing today?
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Awesome.
We didn't hear from Karen because she is in Norway, not on mic. All righty. So we're going to talk about what today, Cody?
Your leader's genius.
Yeah, we're going to talk about the importance of understanding the leader of a team or a group's genius and how it impacts the rest of the team in really positive ways and potentially negative ways, and how to guard against the negative and how to accentuate the positive, right?
Mm-hmm.
So here's the deal. It is really important to understand that a leader has an undue or an exaggerated influence on a team, and that's okay. And so when we look at any given team, that leader, we need to embrace that, right? We need to understand what the leader's working geniuses are and say, that's a good thing. Am I right?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's no reason to say this is not about mitigating or pulling back with that. It's in some ways about awareness and utilization, proper utilization of it.
Right. The personality of a team is going to be really impacted by the genius of a leader.
Yeah, the first thing that we will do if we look at a team map is look for who is the leader. And often, if you've created a team map within your Working Genius portal or you're making one on your own, the first thing to do is put a star by that person's name or bold it just to call out in this group. If a discerner galvanizer is the leader, first of all, you're in trouble. Just kidding. But second of all, there's going to be more love and weight on that team towards that activation stage, towards that discerning and galvanizing.
Mm-hmm. And I'll say, I know Bo is going to try to make a disparaging joke about me there, which there are many to be made as a DG. But I will say that the way that plays itself out practically is related to some of the things that we've talked about on this podcast, which is every one of us has this innate desire to live in our geniuses at the elevation that we find most enjoyable. Well, the leader actually has the formal authority to do that very thing. So in other words, if you're a leader, it's very common that if you're not aware of it, especially, but if you're not aware of it, it's even more common that you will make most meetings or most conversations or most interactions with your team match the elevation that you enjoy the most. So we've even had it where I'll say how this plays out practically. We've had a leader who's an enablement tenacity leader. And again, we say this, there's no perfect type for leader.
Like we've worked with teams that have.
Yeah, we've worked with one. And there's no perfect type. All of these people can be a leader. But it's more likely that person at a quarterly offsite is going to have a very scheduled, here's what we do for the first 15 minutes and the next 30 minutes, because that's where they feel comfortable. But it has an impact on the team.
Mm-hmm. Right. And we don't want to like beat them up for that. I was just thinking about in football, like if you have a quarterback who's really good at running the ball, you don't go, okay, stop running. And we have to balance that out by making him throw the ball all the time. Then what we end up doing is losing his strength. And we need to lean into that leader's genius. Because if the leader is being properly utilized and the leader is working in his or her genius, then we are probably utilizing them well. And that's something we need to support and honor. Mm-hmm. I mean, the table group, I'm an ID, and we've kind of figured out over the years when we did the Working Genius that I didn't love galvanizing. That's how we came up with this. And so making me galvanize all the time was not actually a good thing because it was frustrating me and it was taking away from my ability to do ID. Now, that didn't mean I could abdicate that. And I remember going, Cody, you have galvanizing. Be the chief galvanizing officer. On a daily basis, you're going to galvanize people. And that was great. What it didn't do is make me be something I'm not. Now, that didn't mean I didn't galvanize sometimes, because every leader has to do stuff they don't love, but I was doing it all the time. And that's not a good thing. You don't want to take your leader and make them bend the hardest away from their geniuses, because then that's going to have a huge cost on the team, right?
Yeah, and I think the another way to say it is sort of like, you should do the thing that you're uniquely gifted at doing and do it as much as possible, and then delegate or deputize the rest. You be aware of where your shortcomings are and then find people to fill those gaps.
Hey, you know something I've never said, you guys, is that like in our company, you might say I'm the chief invention officer. And even though a lot of us have discernment, and maybe I would be comfortable being the chief discernment officer if you made me do that, but I shouldn't be the chief galvanizing officer. I shouldn't be the chief wondering officer. Certainly shouldn't be the chief enabling or tenacity officer. And that's okay, because making me be the CXO of something I'm not good at is not good for anybody, me or the company. Right.
One way I've seen this practically played out recently is Cody has so many meetings. He has so much that he needs to do. And so what ends up happening is if there's a task that needs to get kind of finished, or maybe in the later stages of work, somebody will go grab time on his calendar. And what his calendar can get filled up doing work that he's not working in his genius. Whereas what I want, Cody's an exceptional discerner and galvanizer. I want to first put time on his calendar to make sure we're using his best. Does that make sense? Not just blocking time to make sure that we're finishing. No, let's use this guy. And I know, of course, I'm disparaging you, Cody, sometimes, but your genius of discernment is amazing. I want more of it, right? And Pat, where we've gotten in trouble with you is when we say, oh, we'll take that away from him because he's really, really busy. No, we should use the genius of our leader. It will lift all boats. It will make everybody better if we can use their genius more.
And I love this because it's like the leader is not more important than the other people in the organization. We're all children of God. We're all equal human beings, no doubt. But the leader's strengths have to be acknowledged. And it's interesting how I've seen so many CEOs or so many pastors or principals or leaders of departments who think their job is to subjugate or to subdue their geniuses for everybody else. And that kind of sets the wrong tone. Now, what's key, though, is that we find people to fill their gaps. And we just did a little bit of a reorg here where we moved somebody with strong tenacity skills, a very key performer, into Cody's area to fill in that gap for him. And it was hard because we had to move her out of one department and into another one. But it was so we could get more of the goodness that Cody has and not make him feel like he had to constantly go do the things he doesn't love to do. Right.
And I'll just say briefly, it is changed in 3 weeks. It's changed what we're able to accomplish over here. It is dramatically, and everyone was already aware. If you've listened to this podcast at all, I have a negative amount of tenacity. And so the idea, and you guys were all aware of that, but reorganizing and being, and organizing the team in a way that makes up for those deficiencies, that's where we're hitting the ground running. We've done 3 weeks has made even a huge difference.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so funny. I hate to keep using football analogies, but since we're all in a fantasy football pool here at work and giving each other a hard time, if you have a great running quarterback, maybe you can trade your wide receiver, one of your good wide receivers, to get a better lineman. And people go, oh, well, that's a bummer. It's like, no, actually, it's going to enable the leader to be even better at what he does, rather than constantly trying to discourage him or her from doing what they love to do.
So, Pat, how do you respond to the leader who looks at their team map or looks at their team and has that, oh no, I feel guilty that I have made more meetings about my genius, or I know that I've drawn our organization to have more of that? Their first response might be guilt. What would you say to that?
I would say, I like to explain, humility is not self-deprecation or blaming yourself. It's recognizing, yes, these are my skills. And first, I say, if you can't recognize and acknowledge your talents and the impact your talents and skills have on your team, then you're not going to be able to accept criticism. And I honestly think when somebody lacks humility, what we should probably do is say, are you comfortable receiving a compliment? Or are you comfortable saying, and not feeling braggy, saying, yes, I am really good at these things? And what we find when we work with executive teams is when we do the team effectiveness exercise and everybody goes around the table and tells the leader what they do well and what they love about the leader, suddenly the leader's like, wow, you've acknowledged that. Then right after that, we have people tell them what they're not good at, and they totally accept it. But if we started with just, let's tell them what they're not good at, so many of them would be defensive, because you have to accept the good in order to be comfortable hearing the bad. And so what I would say to somebody is, first acknowledge that your DG, Cody, is really good for your department. We need it. We love it. It's helped us a lot. Now let's talk about the fact that your lack of T can sometimes be a problem. And then he's going to be like, yes, please, I want help. I know that I'm not good at that. Otherwise, he's going to feel like it's hard for a person to acknowledge their deficiencies when nobody is calling out their strengths. It really is.
That's great.
So let's talk now about what. Go ahead, Cody.
I was going to say, I would even say a conversation you and I have had, or we've had on this team, Pat, is your invention and discernment. A lot of times what happens to leaders, we utilize their gifts, but then we start to utilize them in different areas of the business. And for you, like one of the things that we try to do here is like, you're an inventor discerner. Now you can invent and discern around an email series, or you can think of the next book that goes and changes the world of work. And so it even matters where we put your attention. And in some cases, like here's a perfect example of what you just described, which is like, hey, Pat, we really love it when you invent at the highest level and you're coming up with new ideas to change the world of work. And sometimes when you do it and invent around the process of onboarding people into into a micro part of our business, it can be a little disruptive and it takes you away from the biggest use of you, so that's another way to have that. Yeah.
Exactly. I remember in the early days of the company, I would go out and do a speech or something, and I'd come back and I'd accidentally left like the power cord to my computer in my room, and people that had a different working genius would say, "Gosh, Pat, that costs like $20. You got to quit doing that." And I remember, and I'd feel guilty. And finally, one day I said, "Hey, just so you know, I'm not like tossing them out the window of the car. I'm not leaving them on purpose. Like, hey, here's $20. But if I'm really focused on the customer and my speech and all that, and somehow I leave $20 behind, I think it's actually a good trade-off. Because if you want me to come back with my cord every time, and that's my priority, I'm probably going to be focused on things that I'm not great at. And it's probably not going to mean that I'm good with the client or good with the talk. And so I think what we have to do is acknowledge, accept, and embrace what the leader is good at. But now let's talk about the danger of over-indexing or indulging the leader's working genius. Who wants to start?
Well, I think this is great because the same way that you can, when I look at a team map and you just might as well attach you might as well double the leader's type, right? That can be really positive in like, oh yeah, let's use all of Pat's ID. But it also can be a magnetic pull in a wrong way sometimes, especially if the leader's not self-aware, where they can even start to accumulate people around them that are just like them. If you're a galvanizing leader and that's your favorite activity, without the self-awareness of knowing that you need other types of genius on the team, you might be prone to hiring or inviting more galvanizers on the team because that's really fun for you. And that's not a good thing for the team as a whole, or you getting projects done, but it's enjoyable for you as a leader.
Yeah, I will say, and this is not easy for me to do, but I have to get good at it. I think this is something I've always been aware of, is that I really value people who are good at things I'm not good at. And I remember when we started the table group 27 years ago, my dad said, God rest his soul, he said, Pat, I said, Dad, I'm going to start my own company. He was like, oh no, you had benefits and you were a vice president at that company, old school. And I said, nah, I don't want to do it on my own. And I'm bringing these 4 people with me. And he's like, oh, no, don't hire anybody yet because you might not be able to afford to pay them. And so that kind of was conventional wisdom. And I said, Dad, I'm so bad at half the stuff we're going to need to do to run this company. If I don't bring them with me, I'm never going to succeed because I know that Tracy and Amy and others could do things that I'm terrible at. And I love that they're good at those things. But there's a tendency sometimes for the leader to think the things I do are what's most important and the things that other people do are less important. And so I'm not going to value those. So people can work if an organization is over indexing, I say that all the time, on the leader, they can stop appreciating. And the people that have the opposite working geniuses can start to feel undervalued and unseen. And so I think it's really important that an organization not overlook the very geniuses that the leader doesn't have. You should almost look at what their working frustrations are and celebrate the people that are good in those areas.
I was literally just thinking, Pat, a great hack is to start with your frustrations and know you're probably not going to be if you're the leader and you know your frustrations, I'm not going to be in as many of those types of meetings or doing that kind of work. So you might have to be more effusive in your praise for the people who are doing that. Does that make sense to verbally acknowledge what they're doing? Because you won't be side by side doing the work with them.
It's so funny. I remember I'd go to speeches with people, and Tracy and I would talk about this, and I'd be like, thank you for being here. You make everything better. You think about this. And Karen, and they're like, Pat, if I had to do what you do, I would die. And I'm like, oh, well, I want to celebrate the things you do that I couldn't do. And when that happens in an organization, when people are walking around celebrating the very things they're worst at in others, that's a fabulous thing. When people are trying to call attention to themselves in the areas that they're good at, that's actually creates division.
Yeah, and we talk about, Pat, the idea that what gets rewarded gets repeated, or what gets celebrated gets repeated. And if you're like, I've even had a personal friend talk about this as an inventor leader, not you, Pat. I'm not trying to tell a story about you in front of your face here with a pseudonym, but a friend who was an inventor who was the leader, and she felt like, well, I have these other people on my team. She's a small team entrepreneur, and she's like, and I kept asking them for them to come up with ideas. The burden was always on me, and I kept saying like, hey, why can't I want you guys to come up with ideas? And before she understood Working Genius, she thought, oh, I guess they just don't want to, or they can't, or I'm the only one, and felt all this pressure for that. And then after doing Working Genius, realizing, oh, that's her role on the team. Not because she's the leader, but because she's the inventor. And the other people who didn't have invention kept feeling guilty when they were like, I don't have an answer for you. I love the conversations we have with Matt before we name these podcasts, where you throw out an invention and his discernment says, well, that's not a good title. And you say, well, then you come up with one. And he's like, I'm not an inventor, but that actually gives you language for it.
Right. And that brings us back to why this is so powerful, because guilt and judgment, when we see other people not do things that we can do naturally, we can judge them and say, oh, they're just not good at that. They don't care. And it's like, no, it's just they have a different natural thing. I like to talk about, so Cody and Bo, what are your two working frustrations?
Enablement and tenacity.
All three of us have those.
Yeah, all three of us have enablement and tenacity as our working frustrations. Okay. So we knew we needed that. So we hired an ET. And I'm going to tell you, we didn't know what to do with the guy, because it is so anathema to us. And we're like, yeah, you just figure out what you're going to do there. And he's like, yeah, I don't really do that. We're like, why not? That's the best part of a job, is figuring it out on your own. And it took us a long time to really embrace, and we're just figuring it out, that he has skills that we don't even understand. And so we need to celebrate that and manage him to be an ET. And that just is really, really hard for us to do. And so, and we've known for years, we need ETs around here. Yeah, but if you hire them and you treat them like we don't know how to even turn the engine on, then you're not going to be able to keep them. So it's just an interesting thing about the leaders have to be respected and honored and utilized properly, but you really need to look at what their working frustrations are and honor and celebrate the people that fill the gaps.
Yeah.
Make sense?
It does make sense. I do think, though, that so many leaders, because of their working geniuses, they value those things. So it's really hard for them to embrace the other geniuses onto the team.
Yeah, and you guys have beaten the crap out of me over the years in a good way, because I would always come up with an idea and say, yeah, we can get that done in a few weeks. And people would go, Pat, you don't understand what it takes to implement these ideas you come up with. And the truth was, now I realize, yeah, you're right. I just didn't understand, because I did not have an appreciation for G, E, and T. And so, yeah, you have to be able to say to the leader, hey, you're good at those things and we love that, but trust us, you're over leaning into that and you're underappreciating the other things, so that they can. Because you're right, a leader naturally is going to understand and appreciate what they're good at over what they're not good at. And they need to be, you need to take the newspaper out and hit them over the nose like a puppy and say, hey, stop it. You got to appreciate the E and the T and the G and all those other things, or vice versa, depending on what you are.
And I'll say this right before we close, Pat. I think there's so many people, when we say, hey, any type can be a leader, and it's really important that you're self-aware. I think I've even, in the last couple months, met 3 different founders of companies who are IGs like Bo. And I was like, oh, is there something there? Does that happen? And the reflection of that was like, actually, that totally makes sense. They're double disruptive. They come up with an idea. They rally people around the idea, and it starts to form a company or a endeavor or, idea product. And then you meet, it's about how you become the leader is actually probably more important than is that the leader? Because we met a WD the other day who started a company 9 years ago, and it was like, oh, that's amazing. They started it out of this like concern for what the market needed, and they had seen what worked and didn't work. So none of that is about like whether you're an entrepreneur or whether you're a leader. It's about how you go about doing all of those activities.
Yeah. I'm gonna say one more thing before we close, because you just reminded me of this. We talk about Working Genius a lot here, and a lot of our listeners do too. Every single type is equally lovable. And I know this sounds like motherhood and apple pie, and every type has unique ways that they can annoy. But there is no such thing as like, oh, that type is really frustrating, or and it's really easy to slip into the thing about saying, oh, that type just annoys me. And it's the truth of the matter is, some types are easier to get to know initially, and some types are easy to misunderstand. But there is no such thing as a type that is lesser of a person or less lovable than another. They're all human beings, children of God, and it's just they have different handles, and that's what's interesting about Working Genius.
Yep.
Hey, before we go, let me just promote something. If you're listening to the Working Genius podcast and you've not considered Working Genius certification, it is probably the fastest way to really become an expert in this that you can begin using with your team if you're a team leader or a team member, or you work with teams inside of your company. We do things where we look at team maps like we've talked about today and teach you how to, diagnose those and what you could do next. And it's fast. It's fun, engaging, 2 days virtual. We'll put the link to it. There's still some spots to be able to sign up this fall. Pat, go ahead.
I will tell you, I was not that involved in the Working Genius certification. Tracy built the program at first, and Julie helped launch it. And then we have all these wonderful trainers, and Carrie and everybody and Ashley that organize it. I keep running into people who are certified. Some of them are full-time trainers. Some of them are just managers that want to do it. They come from all different walks of life. And every one of them says, oh my gosh, I had no idea that in 2 days, less than 2 days, I could get to know people and learn this stuff and go deep, and it's meaningful. And then they leave and they go use it in ways that we couldn't even imagine. So some people are listening out there saying, well, who would get certified? Anyone who's passionate about this stuff. And then you can go into your family, into your church, into your company, into your school, and be a Working Genius deliverer. And it's a fabulous thing to do. So it is one of those things that so many different kinds of people do. And I love hearing the feedback from them, because I was not involved in it and they love it. And so I just want to let people know that it's something that other people who have done it are raving about it. And we love the fact that there's more people signing up all the time. All righty. It's fun to brag about others. All right. Thanks for listening to this, everybody. We love the Working Genius tool. We love doing this podcast for you. We love your feedback, and we'll look forward to talking to you next time on the podcast. God bless.